The following program is a UW-TV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. In 1951, Ningkun Wu was working on a PhD in English at the University of Chicago when he was asked to return to China and teach. He accepted the invitation, but within 2 years found himself denounced by the Chinese government as a counter-revolutionary and an ultra-rightist. He would spend the next 20 years in and out of prison, one of thousands of Chinese intellectuals and dissidents who the government decided needed thought reform. Ningkun Wu tells his story in a new book called A Single Tear, A Family's Persecution, Love, and Endurance in Communist China. Welcome to Upon Reflection.
Thank you.
In 1951, when you got this invitation to return to China and teach, what was the political situation in that country?
The communists had come to power 2 years before, in 1949. And the people were quite enthusiastic about the new regime, and all my friends and relatives urged me to accept the offer. And I was anxious to go back and serve my people.
You were excited. You felt that the change in government and then the defeat of Chiang Kai-shek boded well for your country, that there was a chance that conditions for many people who lived in great poverty, for example, would improve.
Yes, that's exactly how I felt. Although I had served with the nationalists, I was disappointed with what they did, especially after the war. There was so much corruption. The government was impotent, and they were defeated by the communists. And the communists were said to be the new saviors.
So there was an attraction in the idea of going back and being part of this whole new change in your country. You said your family supported the idea, but not everybody did. There were some people who were a little concerned about it.
Very much so. That is, my sister in China wanted me to go home, but my other siblings, my brother in Taiwan, my sister in Hong Kong, strenuously objected to it.
And what were they so concerned about? Why didn't they want
because
you to go?
They probably knew more about the communists than I did, and I thought they were victims of the nationalist propaganda.
Well, you made the decision to accept the invitation, and you went to China. And what kind of expectations did you have, and what did you find in reality?
Well, I expected China would be a free country, since the communists had always said they were fighting for democracy and freedom in China. That's also what the students believed in, and why the students supported the communists. So I expected to find a country free of exploitation, free of corruption, and I would have a chance to help bring up a new generation of English scholars.
And what did you find in reality?
The first thing I found was this hysteria against U.S. imperialism, and I thought that was understandable. But then, pretty soon, it turned out that I was part of the object of the hysteria. So I became a suspect.
Because you had lived in the United States, you had been associated with the nationalist forces.
Yes, and because I've been here so long, I've been here nearly 8 years.
You weren't alone, though. I mean, there were a lot of people who were persecuted, and some had never been to the United States. And it seemed like the common crime was that you were intellectuals.
Yes, indeed. Especially I was one of the outspoken intellectuals. I had taken freedom of speech for granted. You see, that was what I got in the United States.
But why were intellectuals considered so dangerous? Why were they such a target?
Because intellectuals think and talk and write whereas the peasants and the workers don't do that. So for centuries, the intellectuals have always been the feared portion of the populace.
Now, how did the pressure get put on you? You know, you were called an ultra-rightist, a counter-revolutionary. What did the government do to put pressure on you?
Oh, they did it step by step. In the beginning, I was asked to examine my own thinking, my own past, and I would be criticized by my students, and even simply for lending a copy of The Great Gatsby to other students. And they said, held it up in their hands, what? Is this the kind of crap you brought back from the U.S. imperialists to corrupt the socialist youth with? But that was only the beginning. And later on, I was subjected to greater pressure. During the next political campaign, I was denounced as a hidden counter-revolutionary. I was publicly and widely denounced.
These attacks would come in waves. I mean, you look at it, and it's almost like a cycle that moves up and down. What was pushing those waves? Why would the repression get more intense at times and then drop away and then re-emerge again?
I suppose the government was actually trying to change the entire social system. And inevitably, they ran into visible or invisible resistance. So depending on the amount of resistance they ran into, for example, in 1955, the campaign against hidden counter-revolutionary came because a leading literary critic has spoken against the system. And the government felt, oh my gosh, here's the avant-garde of the intellectuals.
There were even times when people were encouraged to offer up their criticisms of the government, but you only found out that that would be used against you later.
Yes, exactly. That's what happened in 1957. Mao Zedong advocated the famous 100 Flowers movement. Let 100 flowers blossom, let 100 schools of thought contend. So we were requested, were solicited to speak up, and were promised there would be no retribution of any kind. But 5 weeks later, he said, well, this is not the kind of criticism we wanted. We wanted constructive criticism, but all this is counter-revolutionary talk.
As you said, that the pressure came in steps, and it grew more and more and more serious. And finally, in the late 1950s, you were sent away to prison.
Yes.
Tell me about that experience.
I was denounced not merely as a rightist, but an ultra-rightist, that a rightist of the worst kind. So I was stripped of my professorial post and also sent to the labor reform camp.
Now you had married by this time.
Yes.
You had a young child.
Yes.
Another was on the way.
Yes.
And you went to the first place was called Half Step Bridge.
Yes. Yes.
And tell me what it was like when you walked in the door, where your new home was.
Yeah. Well, I walked in. The first thing that they said to me was, "You are from the CID." That means the
Well, you were
Chinese.
a spy.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was not a spy, but the department was the equivalent of CIA. So it was strictly a top secret organization. So I was not to tell where I was from. So I said, which other unit you know best in Beijing? I said, Peking University, I suppose. So they said, okay, you're from Peking University. You're not from CID. Remember that, or you're getting into trouble.
It was all, I mean, I guess the word that keeps coming to mind, it's so arbitrary. Things would change from one moment to the next, what crime you were accused of, and there was no there was no predictability to it at all.
Exactly. Well, that's one thing I didn't like about the system, the arbitrariness, and the individual has no say. Your fate is in the hands of these arbitrary dictators. They call themselves dictators. So,
So you were in this prison for a time. The conditions were very grim.
yes.
And then you were moved to the wilderness, and there was another whole idea behind this next step in the rebuilding of your ideas and your thoughts.
Yes. Yes, because I had always thought all that had happened to me was partly because of my fault. I was to blame for my own suffering, since many of my friends who also returned from British or American universities were doing very well. Some of them had even joined the party. So
Some had even denounced you,
yes,
hadn't they?
yes, indeed. And many of my good friends stopped talking to me. So I thought it was partly my fault. I probably do need thought reform, but I didn't know how to go about it. I thought perhaps the hard labor was the only way, so I worked very hard, but I soon discovered they never meant to reform your thought. They just wanted to punish you, to reduce you to obedience.
There were people in the wilderness, in the place where you labored very hard in very difficult conditions and cold weather, who showed kindness to you. There were occasional people who were supposed to be your guards and your...
Oh, yes,
who were very kind to
yes, I
you.
remember him dearly. This Captain Lee, you know, he was a very inconspicuous ex-soldier, but he was never harsh to us. He never used any communist jargon. He never shouted at us, but he was just like a friend. He was walking into our barracks or our cells and chat with us. And one day when we were sent out to, it was early spring, but early spring was deep winter, and to carry logs from the surrounding hills back to the barracks, and there was no trail, so we had to guide the logs back to the camp in a little stream, which was icy cold. So by the time we got there, we were just frozen to death. So he saw it and immediately sent us all to bed and ordered ginger soup for us.
Some hot.
Yes,
something hot to
but
drink.
when the senior captain walked into our barracks, he was shocked. He said, what are you guys doing here? Sleeping in broad daylight. So we said, well, Captain Lee ordered it. He did, and then Captain Lee walked in, brought him out. Captain Lee said, you don't want them catch the cold of death, do you? and the next day he was gone.
And that was the last you ever saw him?
Yeah. I'm sure nothing serious happened to him. He probably lost his job, and he would have been happier in his village anyway.
The next step in your imprisonment has to be the most brutal of all. It was a state prison farm, very a nightmarish place.
Yes. Yes, that was during what was euphemistically called 3 years, 3 hard years. But actually it was man-induced famine. It all happened because of the crazy agricultural policies of Mao Zedong. He wanted to reach communism by one leap, but it didn't happen. A nationwide famine came, and we had nothing to eat. So the inmates were dying every day, and I was probably also on the brink of death. So after I had buried a fellow inmate with my own hands, I said, well, I buried the rightist on my right today, and would the righteous on my left not be burying me tomorrow? It was horrible thought. So I immediately sent an SOS to my wife, urging her to come for possibly a last meeting.
And was this the first time she had seen you since
Yes.
you had first been imprisoned at Hadstep Bridge?
Yeah, because the government has sent her 600 miles away from Beijing south and sent me 1,000 miles away north.
And even when you were going to get out of prison, this would continue to happen with you and members of your family. I mean, separation it was such a part of your life for so long.
Well, the government looked upon it as a matter of course. They could separate the family anytime they liked, sent the children to kindergartens, sent the father to prison, sent the mother as well. And that would probably be good for our thought reform and for the education of the children.
How did you survive those years in prison?
I suppose it's partly because there was nothing on my conscience, and partly because my wife and my mother had killed herself when I was still a little child. So I would call it a kind of immunization from childhood.
You'd had a lot of rough times as a youngster, and it helped toughen you up for this.
Yes.
As you mentioned, your wife was also instrumental in this, and
Yes.
part of your good fortune
Very
was to
much
have
so,
a
yes.
wonderful wife.
Yes, she is great. She is a Roman Catholic. She never tried to convert me. I have not been converted yet. I'm still waiting for her to save me from the other place to her place. But yes, she was instrumental. She kept the family together, brought the children under the strongest social, political, and financial difficulties. And she came to my rescue when I was on the brink of death. She pleaded with our former bosses in Beijing. She put them to shame, and so they just had to let me go home.
And part of the difficulty, I would imagine, I read all of this description about the time that you spent in these various prisons, and it seems to me almost the worst part of it would be the fact that they never told you how long you were going to be there.
You got it. Yeah, that's what I call the unending psychological warfare the government waged against its people, especially its victims like me. You see, when I was sent to the labor camp in the Northeast, they would say, "Oh, it won't be long." And when I asked them, I said, "When are we going to get released?" The answer was, "When you are thoroughly reformed." So I said, "When? How do I know I'm thoroughly reformed?" "When you are released."
You were chided by criminals in prison who said, "Well, at least we know when we're going to get out."
That's right,
You don't
exactly.
know.
They were convicts. But they said that, but of course, they were naive too. The government later had a policy of not allowing any of these people to go back what they call society. There would not be bad elements poisoning the society.
One of the more frightening, in a whole bunch of different frightening times in this book, is the emergence of the Red Guards in the 1960s in the Cultural Revolution. How was that? I mean, it's hard to imagine how something like this could happen, that gangs of young people would simply be allowed to run through the country and terrorize whoever they felt like terrorizing.
Well, its government was behind it. There was already a personality cult in China. So whatever the government called upon them to do, they would do it. So the government had called upon them to sweep away all cow demons and snake spirits.
Now, you make a lot of jokes about the phrase cow demon in this book. And there's a lot of humor and very unlikely moments in this book. But I don't think you ever... What is a cow demon?
Well, a cow demon and snake spirits are mythical characters. In Chinese mythology, they were the bad ones.
Ah, the evil spirits.
Yeah, the evil spirits. So by using the phrase, the party has isolated these people from the good people in society.
What did China lose because of these years in its history?
Oh gosh, it's a terrible thing. It's not just 10 years or 20 years. It has lost all the opportunity to really modernize the nation, to educate the younger generations. It has such a horrible, demoralizing effect on the younger generations.
We saw another Beijing Spring, though, not that many years ago in Tiananmen Square, and we know that it ended very, very badly. But did that give you hope that that shoots still continue to come up in your country?
Definitely. I never lose hope. I have faith in the Chinese people, and on the night of the proclamation of the martial law, the BBC in London called me at my hospital at midnight for a 6 o'clock telephone interview in the morning. The first question, they asked me whether this was the end. I said, no, this is the beginning of a newer beginning.
It's, again, part of this wave,
Yes.
this pattern. What about the influence of other countries? Did you find that your life improved when, for example, Richard Nixon came to China, or other countries began paying closer attention to what was going on
Oh,
there?
definitely. That's what happened during the 10 years before Tiananmen. That's why I was allowed to be a professor again, to go abroad for academic visits, and to receive and associate with foreign friends in Beijing. But because Tiananmen changed things, but I think the things are getting better now.
What did you lose? What did you and your family lose as the result of these years?
Well, I might have become a great academic, as I always wanted to. Well, I could say that now. Maybe I would never become an academic anyway, a great academic anyway. But still, I lost all those years. Not just me, the whole nation. You know, all these, a million well-educated people sent to the countryside, doing things or doing nothing. That is a great loss to the nation. And it's such a bad example for the young people.
I didn't detect any bitterness in this book, but there must be moments when you're very angry about this. I mean, that huge chunks of your life were literally stolen from you.
Indeed, and then I told myself, I was not the only one, and I probably deserved it because of my big mouth. There are better people who have paid with their lives, like the talented colleague at Yanjing University, multilingualist, a poet, Shakespearean scholar. When I thought of them, I said, I have no reason to complain. When I saw how the peasants lived, I said, I have no reason to complain.
You do have to ask, though, from time to time, was it worth it? And especially at the end of this book, I mean, there's so much absurdity to your situation. I mean, in the one minute you're a monster and a terrible person, the next minute the government is moving you into a new apartment and whitewashing the walls and doing all of this because you have company coming from America.
Yeah, that is absurd. I think that's one thing I want to bring out is the absurdity of our experience in the past 40 years, and so many ironies. Like the great Marxist professor of history at Yanjing University, who had accused me of lying in my autobiography, and then he became the chairman of the great chairman of the history department of the great Peking University, not only to be denounced as a counter-revolutionary himself and committed suicide. This is horrible irony.
How, when you come out of China, what do you find in terms of what people know about those years, about people from other countries, and what kind of information or images they developed of those years in China?
I think they know very little about the years before the Cultural Revolution, especially, and some of the people haven't heard of China before Tiananmen because CNN did all that. this is what I hope this part of things my book will do, because my book gives a comprehensive account of life in contemporary China over the past 40 years under the communist regime.
Can you go back?
I hope so. I don't think my book is particularly bad for the communists. They can't accuse me of anything. I'm just telling the truth.
But from their perspective, that was your problem all along, wasn't it?
But you see, this book is based on an outline, sort of outline, published in England in '86 when I was visiting Cambridge University. And this particular essay, called From Half-Step Bridge to Cambridge, was published in Beijing 1988.
And what was the reaction?
Nobody read it, except the foreigners. The Dutch ambassador read it and immediately gave a copy to the new American ambassador.
I interviewed Natan Sharansky some years ago, who spent many years in a Soviet prison. One of the things that he said was, here you are struggling for the things that you care most deeply about, freedom and liberty. And then that changes, and the next minute you find yourself standing in a supermarket in Tel Aviv trying to figure out which brand of orange juice to buy that morning. Did you ever, and he was sort of overwhelmed by this feeling, I guess it's the, was it worth it, and this doesn't seem real to me, and now that the struggle is over, what is life all about? Did you feel that at any point?
Well, it's, maybe my case is somewhat different from his, because he had never been to the United States before, or to Tel Aviv before. But I had spent 7 or 8 years in the country. In this country, I had always taken freedom for granted. So I was, well, of course, I had my feelings. I was like, my goodness, the air smells different here.
I wish we had more time. There are so many wonderful stories, so many terrible stories too in this book, but wonderfully told. And I want to thank you, Ningkun Wu, for being a guest on Upon Reflection, your new book, A Single Tear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.